Here's a quick demonstration of one of the uses for a gate. This is actually quite handy when you've got drum loops and other loops or recordings that have a lot of reverb. It's a way of removing some of that reverb and making the sound more dry. A gate is a dynamics processor, just like a compressor, so it's working on the volume, but there's a difference between a compressor and a gate. What a compressor does is it turns down the volume of louder parts of the sound, and in doing so helps to reduce your clipping and helps to reduce your dynamic range, which makes the sound fit often better in the mix. So it's responding to the loud sounds by shutting down, by suppressing the volume. What a gate does is it is like a door, and it only opens to let the sound through when the sound is loud. That is when it exceeds a threshold. So what a gate does is it's like a door, and whenever I have a loud hit from my sound source, the door will open and let the sound through. But in the softer spots, the door will close because the sound is not loud enough. The sound doesn't exceed the threshold. So I'm just going to play back this loop for you dry, bypassing the gate, and you can hear this is a conga loop with a fair amount of reverb on it. It's artificial reverb. You can hear it being sort of a gated reverb, so it's got a really artificial sound, but still nice and wet. A good use for this little trick to dry it up a little bit. You might want to apply your own reverb to it, or echoes or something, and the reverb that's in there is getting in the way, is muddying things up. So I'm going to try and dry the loop up by using my gate. And what I'm going to do is start just by playing it back with the gate on. Now the gate is on, and you'll notice what happened here. Do you see the green lights? That means that right now all the sound is being blocked. The gate is closed, completely closed. When I start playing this back, you're going to see the green LEDs drop. And that means that the gate is being opened up by the louder sounds here. So we'll just play it back with the default threshold and see what we get. Now you can see that there's a bit of activity on the gate. It's trying to close, probably in these little spots in here, but the threshold isn't really high enough, so the gate is not really being allowed to close much at all. I'm going to increase the threshold gradually, and as I do, we will get more closure on the gate. And eventually we'll get quite a dry sound, and even to the point where we might lose the sound entirely. So let's just give this a try. I'll play it back, and I'll gradually increase the threshold. There. And at that point, the threshold is 0, which means every sound in the loop is not strong enough to open the gate up. So that's why the green light stays all the way. But you'll notice you still hear sound, and there's a reason for that. Gates have another parameter, usually, called range. And what the range does is it says, okay, so if I close the gate, am I going to close it all the way? Or am I only going to close it part of the way? So this can help when you have, for instance, some room tone in your sound or some background tone that you don't want to cut entirely, and you can play with this. But by having it at its default setting of -20, even with the gate closed, we still get sound bleeding through. So it will never go completely to silence. I would like it to go to silence to make this as dry as possible. So I'm going to make the gate range maximum. In other words, it will almost completely kill the sound. And I'm going to start to dial back a little bit on the threshold until I begin to get the conga loop back, but quite dry sounding. So do you notice as I dial back, the first thing to appear are the hits here and here. That's because they're nice and loud, right? The softer hits like these need the threshold to be dropped a little more for them to sneak through. Now, I can also make it sound drier or wetter by changing the release time. And this is basically, you could think of this, in this case, as being kind of like the decay on your reverb. So I'm going to shorten the release time, and we should get a drier, more punctuated sound. Let's have a listen. Now you'll hear as I dial it back, it starts to sound unnatural. It gets cut off too quickly. Now, that's not good or bad, it's just a fact. That's what happens. And you might say, well, that doesn't sound natural, or you might say, that sounds really cool. Because remember, you can now do something with this. For instance, add reverb to this. So if I add a little bit of reverb to this particular setting, I'll grab a RV7000, drop it in, just set it up to give me a little bit of reverb. So remember, right now we've got this very dry conga sound. And now I'm going to add a little reverb to that to restore that sense of space that we want to have around the sound. Let's see what we get. I'll make it shorter, more of a smaller space. There. So the reverb does quite a bit to bring back the natural quality of this drum loop. Now, I do actually think that I would prefer to have a little longer release on this, something like that. And I think I'm going to drop the threshold and see if I can't reveal a little more of these tiny little hits in here. There's like a da-da, there should be a bump, da-da, da-da, like that. So I'm going to try and expose those if I can a little bit. So we're starting to get a bit of these sounds peeking through too by dropping the threshold. But of course the problem with that is the farther I go down on the threshold, the more of the original reverb sneaks through. So I'm kind of playing around with everything here to make it work. And there's a basic introduction to using a noise gate. This is one of several uses for it. I'll see if I can come up with a few more. For now, see you later.